Hello, good afternoon, welcome everyone. My name is Alan McGinley, I'm the library director here at Westfield Memorial Library. Thank you for coming out on this less than pleasant day. When I first saw the weather forecast for today, I was like, oh no. But then I thought about it and I was like, what's more indicative of the Addams Fest vibe, right? So thank you all for making it out. Just so you know, we are live streaming this event, so if you want to see it later, if you want to share it with friends, it'll be on our YouTube channel. I also wanted to mention that we have a lot of the original works of Charles Addams here at the library. They're getting older. We're trying to protect them a little bit, so we actually recently moved them to our local history room. But if you're ever interested in seeing them, you can just ask to see them from one of our reference librarians. I want to thank the town of Westfield and the Addams Fest committee for bringing Emma Straus to us today. Just want to make sure I say your name right. I'm really excited about this lecture and this talk. So thank you all for being here, and I'll turn things over to Emma.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming out today. As we were saying, it's perfect seance weather, as Morticia likes to say. I really am so appreciative that you all came out despite the weather. Hopefully, as you're leaving, you don't get blown away and taken up into the winds, but we'll get there when we get there. For now, I hope that you enjoy this presentation. I'm so thankful to the library for having me today, to the town of Westfield, and all of the folks at Addams Fest. I know that those festivities go on all month, and I know the work that gets put into them. So thank you so much. So just a little bit of background about me, a few areas of study that I have been engaged in, English literature and creative writing, the history of witchcraft as a feminist movement, Gothic literature, Shakespearean literature, gender studies in media, magic lantern operation, pre-cinema entertainment, film study and production. And what I'm up to now, constantly creative writing. I'm a self-taught body painter and a special effects artist. I do photography. I'm currently teaching myself some pre-cinema animation. And I work in education. I promised one of my students that I would give them all a shout out. I work at a school for students with learning and behavioral disabilities. So to all the kids at Pineland Learning Center, I just wanted to give them a shout out today. So a little bit about my thesis and my work. I'm obviously here today to talk about Morticia Addams and the legacy she left for women everywhere, empowering them to break out of their set roles and seek something more. My thesis was centered around the entire Addams family and how revolutionary they were in media, starting in the 1960s during the show's original run, and I also focused on the supplemental character work and development in the 1990 films. My thesis centered around the idea that despite the spookiness and macabre interests of the family, that the most unusual aspect of the Addams family was not, in fact, its gloomy aesthetic and dark humor, but its subversion of the ideology of the American family. The Addamses deviated gleefully from societal norms and openly ignored the pressures to conform to conventional gender roles, offering instead their hilarious vision of family culture as a space for the nurturing and flourishing of true monsters, a husband who adores his wife, a wife who cherishes her husband while articulating her own selfhood, and children who are free to explore their interests no matter how strange. For nearly 100 years, the Addams family has endured as a powerful social critique. Epitomizing the possibilities for radical joy in the domestic sphere, Morticia, Gomez, Wednesday, and Pugsley invite readers and viewers to embrace their own vision of family life as healthy, functional, and happy, a vision that remains and always has been truly revolutionary. As part of my thesis, I actually held my defense in a cemetery. This is St. Mary's Cemetery in Baltimore. It's beautiful. It's one of my absolute favorite places. A majority of my thesis was actually written here. I would go and do my work and bring all my books up the big hill because you have to go all the way up. I wanted to challenge the norms around and the expectations around a typical thesis defense, so that I included both this invitation for my committee as well as a written statement as to why it was important to hold the defense there. My committee even dressed up in achromatic clothing. It was so joyful, it was so wonderful. It was so joyful compared to what we typically think of cemeteries. So in juxtaposition to maybe some of the sadness and grief, similar to what the Addams family sought out to do. If you're interested at all in reading that statement or any of the thesis, I would love to get in touch and share it with you, and I'll leave some of my contact information at the end. Each chapter of my thesis focused on a different aspect around the family, pertaining to the Gothic movement in literature, as well as the comic Gothic in films such as Edward Scissorhands and Young Frankenstein, as well as comedy and horror coming together to critique the mainstream, as well as chapters dedicated to each and every one of the characters. Today, I am here to talk about the wonderful Morticia Addams. For women in the 1950s and into the early 60s, feminine roles were not only outlined, but they were expected to be fulfilled. As was also the case for men, the roles imposing gender and societal conformity on women were a direct response to the fear of deviation. The uniformity of an American household was a means of maintaining the illusion of the American dream that was emphasized by an overt emphasis on capitalism and consumerism that was held by traditional values. Where men's roles contributed to capitalism through economic contributions, women's roles were in the realm of the domestic, making things pretty, tending to the perfect home, keeping their husbands happy no matter their own poor treatment. All of it was a means to maintain the picture-perfect lifestyle that helped define the societal and political value of the American family. One chapter of my thesis was dedicated to the analysis of ads that one might have seen during the original show's runtime. I have included a few here today for your viewing as I speak, and some of these are a little bit shocking to our worldview today. These are only a few of them. Advertisements were often featured women and products for women, but were structured to appeal directly to their husbands. Ironically, while women were the main consumers, the products they were encouraged to buy reinforced their status as constructions of male desire, idealized images of femininity by the male gaze. To modern viewers, such as yourselves, an advertisement might come off as alarming as well as confusing. The images go to great lengths to present the male and female figures as types, that is, characters in a narrative that are implicitly and well known to the viewer. The point such ads make plain is that misogyny was manufactured and sold along with the products featured in them. Products were pitched as making individuals capable of being more themselves. However, in the traditionalist values underlining the marketing that was meant to be oneself was to fulfill one assigned role. Women were meant to keep their husbands around by tending to the home, and they could do this by purchasing these products that made cooking, cleaning, and other housemaking tasks more efficient while rendering their own labor invisible. Men could keep their wives in the home by making enough money to buy such products. Everything was designed to keep everyone in their roles. Sitcoms contributed heavily to this model as well, where advertisements were manufacturing misogyny and capitalist ideals with their products. Sitcoms were providing examples of the model family that would benefit. Because profitable companies depended on families to buy their products, their marketing centered on defining and targeting specific family roles. Sitcom stereotypes such as the bumbling husband and nagging wife emerged as a direct result from such marketing. Consumerism is the idea that the consumption of goods and services purchased in the market is always the desirable goal, and that a person's direct well-being and happiness depend on containing these goods and material possessions. Thus, familiar tropes like that of the husband who resents his wife for never adequately pleasing him help reveal the real goal of consumerism, namely to perpetuate the idea of domestic life as unhappy so that families, and women in particular, will continue to buy happiness in the form of cleaning solutions and cooking appliances. The Addams family emergence at this time placed it in direct contradiction to the dominant model of the family as it was represented in most entertainment and advertising media. The Addamses deviated from the nuclear family that needed mainstream products to be fulfilled. In fact, the family's home was filled with items that might not seem useful to the traditional eye. Their home was filled with oddities, furniture, and decorations that brought them joy, and items that they could share together, such as fencing weapons, the peculiar flowers grown in Morticia's garden, and so on. Further evidence of the family's revolutionary defiance of the mainstream consumerism lies in the fact that their house, as the show's theme song reveals, is a museum. The items in their home are considered peculiar because at first glance they do not have immediate purpose beyond their status as curiosities. Items associated with seances and witchcraft do not, after all, wash the dishes. Gomez's train set does not make him any more money. Morticia's gardening may seem to suggest a form of homemaking, yet she cuts the roses from the stem for two reasons: because she likes them that way, and because Gomez is allergic to them. Instead of utilitarian items designed for efficiency and productivity, their home is filled with objects that offer them joy in their own peculiar way. The capitalist model thrived off the nuclear family, particularly one it could construct as ideally unhappy, so that it could propose consumerist solutions designed to fix that unhappiness. But in the Addams home, the need is not to find a solution to unhappiness in products that will confine them to familiar domestic roles, but rather to understand and constantly seek out what brings them joy. The main source of joy for the Addamses is not in things at all, but in one another, the interests and activities that bind them to one shared experience as a family. I want to emphasize this because everything we have ever been taught is carefully designed to keep us away from ourselves. When we have worth, people start to panic, because when we have worth, we know what we deserve. And when we have worth, when we really know it, we begin to live like it. That's not only scary for society at large, but it can scare us too. Because often, knowing we have worth takes really getting to know ourselves, what we love, shamelessly. If we could imagine what this would look like, living this way, the perfectly imperfect picture would be the Addams Family. That's where Morticia comes in. I studied the work of Carolyn Jones of the original 60s show, who was a trailblazer for later portrayals of Morticia, and Angelica Houston's portrayal of the character. Media was one way these expectations were maintained. As mentioned, sitcoms portrayed heteronormative relationships and perpetuated harmful and demeaning treatment toward women through comedy. Just as advertisements sought to portray characters and situations that were relatable in order to sell products, so sitcoms created family with whom the viewers could identify. Comedy was used in an insidious way to promote viewers' sense of connection and identification with the characters on screen, while also effectuating the viewer's participation in harmful gender roles. Many sitcoms at the time employed veiled jokes around domestic abuse, such as Ralph Cramden's catchphrase, "To the moon, Alice," or other shows, such as Leave It to Beaver and The Honeymooners, not only depicted harmful gender roles, but also reinforced the idea of a nagging codependent woman that either remained the butt of jokes or just in the kitchen. The Addams Family not only challenged this kind of comedy, but brought forth a new woman. The character of Morticia was so new that actress Carolyn Jones was essentially able to invent her, conjuring the personality, the clothing, and the dry humor, taste for the macabre that audiences would later recognize as iconic. In an interview, Jones spoke with the show's fresh nature, saying, "It's so fun because there's no basis in fact. We are able to make up our own rules as we go along. But from the beginning, Charles Addams' original comic strip had established Morticia as a different kind of woman. While Addams' characters would later be expanded on and explored in television and film, it was his own comic vision for a family that challenged the nuclear model that lies at the heart of all iterations of the Addams Family. Of Morticia, Charles Addams had the following to say: "She is the real head of the family, and the critical and moving force behind it. Low-voiced, incisive, and subtle, smiles are rare. This ruined beauty has a romantic side too, and is given to low-keyed rhapsodies about her garden of deadly nightshade, henbane, and dwarf's hair. Generally indulgent of the often sinister activities of her children, her voice is never raised but has great range. Contemptuous and original, and with fierce family loyalty. She never uses a cliché except to be funny." These attributes directly challenge the male-centered model of a perfect woman, one who was always expected to be smiling through chores or effortlessly making the household labor look as if it was second nature. It also inverted the hierarchy of families in shows such as Father Knows Best that typically had an established patriarch at the head. In her portrayal of Morticia, Carolyn Jones was able to accomplish a great deal in the show's 2-season run. The inverse of a traditional sitcom wife, Morticia offered for the non-patriarchal woman. Morticia not only adores her Gothic lifestyle, but also does not feel the need to conform to outside influences. Like Gomez, she approaches everything with enthusiasm and curiosity, especially with regard to her husband and her own children. Morticia's interactions with her family differ of those from traditional sitcom mothers in crucial ways. She is not simply the opposite, a figure of female power that frees herself from patriarchy by neglecting her family and rejecting the importance of domesticity itself. But what differentiates Morticia from other sitcom wives and mothers is precisely the nature of her loyalty to her own family. In her case, devotion is an expression of fierce love, not of predetermined gender roles. Curiosity and affection defined her every interaction with her husband and children in the show, and her respect for them as a whole and autonomous beings is evident. She addresses them as they are, rather than according to any role she expects them to fulfill. She handles her children's peculiar interests, in particular, with great care, while allowing her husband his passionate emotions where other father figures might be expected to be more subdued. Jones's portrayal of Morticia reveals that the non-patriarchal woman is not merely a type. What she represents is not simply a reversal of values that allows women to exchange one set of expectations for another. The focus of the show is not their weirdness, but that the radical equality that exists within their partnership, each working to support and celebrate the other. The sensuality and romantic yearning Gomez and Morticia display for one another is a case in point. What is most interesting about this aspect of their relationship is that Morticia is just as sensual, just as attuned to her own desires as her husband is to his, and that each is acutely aware of the other. Where she might seem merely alluring to Gomez, in actuality, it is every part of her that her husband adores. She does not fall into the archetype of a wife that has to earn romantic affection from her husband. Regardless of what she does or what she does not do, her husband adores her. What matters to him is every aspect of her, and what appeals to her is in exactly the same way, to the same extent, him. The Addams family's embrace of genuine love as an important element of romantic comedy is profoundly ironic, yet it is the respect that the show most powerfully alters and deviates from the norms that defined sitcoms at the time. Because these norms limited women to a greater extent than they did men, Morticia's sensuality is especially crucial. Typically, sex was seldom mentioned in popular television, and it was a particularly taboo topic in family shows, where it was kept, despite what the presence of children obviously implies, behind closed doors. Sex and sexual desire, while necessary for starting the nuclear family model, were not about pleasure, especially for women. In that context, Morticia's enthusiastic engagement in a relationship that consistently featured the pleasures of sensual touch shared an environment of mutual respect, and it was revolutionary. In contrast to the Addams Family radical endorsement of love between husbands and wives, the 1950s sitcoms relied heavily on structuring marriage as a business arrangement. The trope of the nagging, resentful wife was not only reductive, a portrayal of women as two-dimensional and not fully human. It also suggests that women are, essentially, beings free from desire. In the more conventional sitcoms, if a wife were portrayed as sensual, she would generally be confined to one of two stereotypes. The first would be an overly sensual woman who has loose values and ends up being an absent and aloof mother, and the second would be to play her desires for comedic effect, her sensuality displayed as a joke and herself reduced to caricature. In the Addams Family, Morticia is not only treated with respect and adoration, but her own desires and needs are not subject to mockery and sport. Historically, men have weaponized such characteristics against women, and when they cannot, they give women desires that align with the male-centered lens, such as in the case of characters who aren't like the other girls and who are instead just one of the guys. These tropes are harmful as they isolate women from other women and still put them in a position to be defined by men. It is not that Morticia solely has feminine interests, but Gomez can actively share in them. For example, when they sword fight. The pair actively engage with each other's interests, but also have the capacity to go off on their own at times, always able to come back together and share what they have found. It is in the sharing that does not close them off from one another. Morticia's parenting style was part of revolutionizing mother figures as well. Many sitcom mothers were seen doing daily chores and doting over their children to the point of smothering. Distant mothers were frowned upon. What Morticia's detached style did was allow her children to experiment on their own, keeping just enough distance for Wednesday and Pugsley to seek out and find their own interests and experiences. She often allows them to nurture their own passions, such as Wednesday's love for the Bermuda Triangle and Pugsley's playful pranks, while allowing them the autonomy to explore on their own. In one particular episode of season 2, Wednesday has her first crush. Morticia's advice to Wednesday is to talk about her interests, namely Wednesday's spiders, believing that it will win her crush over. Instead of having Wednesday pretend to be someone she is not, her advice is centered around Wednesday's interests and selfhood instead. In sharp contrast to the spoon-feeding methods audiences would expect from mothers and other sitcoms, Morticia displayed her understanding of the value of true independence, strongly encouraging her children to make mistakes and solve their own problems. From the beginning and throughout the show's 2-season run, Morticia practices this style, never abandoning her children, but, on the contrary, supporting their independence while knowing just when to step in and advocate for them. In the first episode, the children go to school, and while their parents are worried about them going off on their own, they understand the importance of doing so. At school, the children are shocked to learn that dragons are routinely slain in fairy tales. Wednesday comes home distraught. Both Morticia and Gomez comfort their children and allow them their confusion and dismay. Morticia commiserates, a poor defenseless dragon, who would do such a thing? The sequence is highly effective as comedy, but also displays Morticia's fierce devotion to her children's emotional needs. She lets them explore on their own, but is always stepping in when they need her the most. This example of balanced parenting that the show provided is nothing short of revolutionary. Morticia's involvement in her children's lives did not preclude her from attending to her own life and her own interests, as she could be seen at any time engaging in her hobbies such as growing plants in her greenhouse or engaging in swordplay with her husband Gomez. Even when she is seen doing the typical activities of a housewife, such as knitting or cooking, she always brings her own flair to the task. For example, when she knits, she produces strange articles of clothing, sometimes with 3 arms. When she cooks, the heavy references to witchcraft poke fun at the typical portrayals of such ladylike activities. She couples the domestic with the supernatural and thus acts as a critique to women's pre-assigned roles. Morticia's interactions with Gomez and her children established the original Addams Family show as a radical development in the history of popular television's treatment of the family and women. The show was not only the groundwork for this functioning couple, however, and later their relationship would become even more compelling as a platform for societal commentary. As it did for Gomez, the 1990s film adaptations opened a space for Morticia's already poignant character to be expanded upon and explored. Actress Angelica Houston, who portrayed Morticia in the films, understood the importance of Gomez and Morticia's partnership. In an interview following the film's release, Houston said, "They're an old married couple, but they're newly in love. Every morning they wake up and they look at each other, and they can't believe how fortunate they are. They live counter to reality in that they're completely entranced by each other at all times. They're devoted to their children, and they take tremendous joy in living their own peculiar lives." In developing her film version of Morticia, Houston was able to expand on the work that Carolyn Jones had done in the 1960s. The Morticia of the 90s films reminds audiences that women are real people with real desires and needs, especially sexual ones. While female sensuality in the 50s and early 60s tended to either be stigmatized or ignored, its representation in 90s popular culture was not, by many measures, much better, especially for characters that were mothers. The Addams Family films remind us that women do not stop having sexual desires when they become mothers, nor do they stop existing altogether past the age of 30. Angelica Houston was 40 years old when she was hired to play Morticia, a casting decision that flew in the face of typical ageist practices of Hollywood. In dramas and comedies, romantic female leads were overwhelmingly played by women under the age of 30. But Morticia's character was not diminished because of her age. On the contrary, she stood as an icon of dark, feminine, sexually liberated personhood. In both films, Morticia is able to communicate her desires clearly and confidently. More importantly, she seeks out sexual pleasure for herself rather than reducing her own desires to that of her husband. The two engage in equal sexual play through communication and flirtatious exchanges. Of course, there are moments in the film where their sensuality is played for laughs, but the laughs come primarily from the other characters' responses to the relationship, not positioning Morticia's sexual needs as the butt of some joke. The nature of their sexual relationship is joyful, curious, exploratory, celebratory, and also, crucially, consensual, something that is missing in the portrayal of sensual or passionate experiences in many other films. In this way, Morticia dispatches any possibility that she might exist solely as the object of a generalized male desire, a prop solely for sex. On the contrary, there are numerous occasions throughout the film where she exhibits her intellect and poise in the face of conflict. Morticia remains a feminist role model throughout by consistently trusting the women in her life, such as her own mother, and she maintains a sense of self without feeling the need to conform to other parents' expectations around her. Throughout the film, the Addams' countercultural model of family is grounded not in the rigidly defined roles, but in finding joy in one another, is consistently set off against the actions and reactions of the more conventional characters present. Morticia attends cheery and phony school plays, meets with Wednesday's concerned teachers, and in the second film encounters privileged wasps. Unwaveringly, she maintains her sense of self and her poise. In the first film, when Wednesday's teacher confronts her about Wednesday's choice of hero for a class project, who is one of her ancestors, a witch that was burned at the stake, Morticia affirms the strong female role models of their family. Amid other student selections, the President of the United States, for example, Morticia enthusiastically endorses Wednesday's choice, which strikes the teacher as unconventional and downright odd. While this is yet another bit played for comedy, it exemplifies Morticia acting as her fullest self. She does not compromise her beliefs even when others deem them odd or strange. Indeed, she deftly sidesteps their opinions altogether, a move that both counters their expressed concern and renders it moot. The core of what Morticia successfully accomplishes is the tricky task of approaching differences with enthusiasm and understanding, recognizing others' views for what they are, namely, theirs. She stays true to herself and does not waste time or energy soothing their fears, or, for that matter, inflicting her own views upon them. While the end of the first film may seem to inscribe Morticia with a familiar damsel in distress role, that is actually far from the case. The climax and resolution of the first Addams Family film upholds as the logical development of Morticia's character. When the family is left destitute from the double crossing and home eviction that has occurred and the betrayal of Uncle Fester, Gomez's spirit breaks. It is Morticia who keeps the family together. The end of the film is a celebration of her attributes as she displays every one with conviction. It is packed with small details that not only strengthen her feminist attributes and the audience's awareness of her central importance to the film. For starters, she again allows Gomez to feel what he is feeling as opposed to expecting him to conform to the strong and stoic masculine role. He is overwhelmed by the grief that comes from his own brother's betrayal, so it is Morticia that sets out to become the family's breadwinner. Not only this, but she also sets out to set things right and confronts Uncle Fester and the film's cast of antagonists herself. Morticia's quiet intellect comes through, and she outsmarts the bunch. Though she is tortured and trapped, the damsel is not in distress at all. The image of her body bound to the torture rack, the film flips another trope on its head. Unflappable, eminently powerful, even in distress, the only thing she cannot do for herself in that moment is to be untied. In allowing her grieving husband the thrill of rescuing her, he manages to bolster his confidence. But Morticia is not in any danger. She allows herself to be captured and tortured because she knows Uncle Fester wouldn't be able to take it. Her intellect in this way, paired with her deep belief in others, as she trusts in Uncle Fester's character to come through. In the 60s, Morticia Addams established herself as the inverse of what was expected of women. Sitcom matriarchs such as June Cleaver were often placed to be in the home and to stay there, or to be the voice of reason for their bungling husbands. Morticia's role is to be the subordinate of no one and the equal of all. She exists not only having partnership with her husband, but also having an established sexual relationship, something seldom allowed to women. The character of Morticia is not a character at all, but can be found in each and every woman who is attuned to herself, her interests and desires, and lives them completely and shamelessly. Thank you so much. If you would like to get in touch, I've left some of my contact information. If you have any interest in reading any parts of the thesis, the whole thesis, I would love to share it with you. I'm currently working on getting a published link. That way I can easily distribute it to others. I have my personal Instagram up there, my email, my Instagram with my creative projects, and I really would love to talk with you more if you have any interest in any of the other areas of study that I mentioned at the beginning. Thank you all so much. You've been a wonderful crowd.
So if anyone has any questions for Emma, I'd be happy to take those questions right now.
I have a question for some of you, or any of you, if you care to share. What was your favorite moment of the Addams Family? If you watched the original show, or if you like the 90s films?
When she's in labor.
Yes.
Is it painful? Is it torture? We. Kisses her.
I know, always. It's such a good opening to a film too.
I love the way Gomez kisses Morticia up the, like all the way up her arm.
Yes.
And my husband, who's not here right now, sometimes does that to me. And and he started it, and it's just a very sweet thing, and it's fun, and it's, anyway, that's it.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
So not so much for Morticia, but also to see Wednesday's character evolution. I grew up watching the 90s movies, and we just happened to have Addams Family Values on last night, because it's always on this time of year. And Wednesday's speech when she's setting the town ablaze, but to see how she is such a evolution of Morticia's character, that clearly her daughter would embrace her own voice and not sort of cow to the pressure of the male gaze like some of the other kids. So I think that evolution is really interesting to me, and always has been.
Yes, I love that too. I actually have a whole chapter just for that film, which turned into like a whole section just on that scene alone. I love it so much.
And so relevant.
Yes.
So, like that speech, it could be said now.
Yes.
Sorry, number 2. The scene where Morticia is talking with her mother, and Wednesday comes through, and she says, "What are you doing with that?" Playing. And
Yes.
No, takes it away, and then gives her a larger
Yes.
Sword, not a sword, it was a battle axe. One, because it's establishing boundaries with a child about playtime. It's taking an interest in the play that her daughter is doing. At the same time, having a generational women scene. She's talking with her mother about her concerns about the family and the situation that they're in, and still takes time to give to her child, interact with her appropriately, establish a boundary, and then going back to the discussion. So it's a really good scene involving multi-generational women.
Yes.
So I had a question from your research, right?
Oh, yes.
If you have this amazing character, right, and she's pushing the boundaries and all these tropes, and clearly it resonates, right? If you can go from the same character coming out of the 60s into the 90s, and then now today it's like Wednesday's so popular. What's your interpretation of why she's one of one? That there's no other replicants, or like there doesn't seem to be other strong characters like her that really lean into all the wonderful things that you touched on. Like, just any thoughts on that? Like, you realize, like, why is it just her?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I could speak to a few things. I think what you were pointing out is that she has endured so well. I think that aspect, I actually discussed this in my defense about how, she has endured because she is within all women, even women that maybe at the time were watching the show and couldn't be liberated in that way. And I think that Carolyn Jones, her, obviously paired with the inspiration from Charles Addams's comics, I think what she said about being able to, invent the character herself, and she was able to play with that. And both of them, I know that Charles Astin, who played Gomez, also said in interviews as well that it felt like playtime, like they were able to play. And I think that a lot of times we hear playtime and we think of it as something childish, but really that's where the creativity comes from. So I think that through that, both actors being able to trust each other and play, especially the show and the director trusting Carolyn Jones as a woman at that time, her sense of play, which, play isn't always afforded to women, especially grown women. So just to have that, I think, as the groundwork is why she's such a strong role model, because it wasn't something that other shows were doing. It certainly paved the way for other shows at the time, because there was the feminist movement in the late 60s and early 70s that carried on throughout. But I think that that's part of the reason why, because they weren't afraid to play, but they were also able to trust that process of inventing these characters, taking them off the page and making them their own. I think the trust in that has to go a long way. Thank you. That was a great question.
Sorry, I also have a question, and that is mentioning the new show, Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen it, and what is your opinion of it? Specifically, one of the plot devices where Wednesday is of the perhaps mistaken opinion that her mother is trying to smother her in that show.
Yeah, actually, that's a great question, because the reason why I focused on the 60s show and the 90s films is because there's sort of this, and I mentioned it in part of my thesis, so I'll try to paraphrase it. There's sort of this timeline that the Addamses have taken where you have the original comics, the 60s show, and then there were some other iterations and spin-off shows because of the show's popularity. Also, shows like The Munsters were popular at the time, and then you really get to the 90s where there was another very strong, very popular portrayal of the family. I think that once the show or the Addams Family got into things like the Addams Family musical, because that was something that I looked at for my thesis, it started to deviate a little bit, because part of the plot was that Wednesday feels like she wants to be happy and bubbly, and her family will say no to that. Where there were episodes of the original show where they would actually celebrate that. If, Wednesday or Pugsley came to them and said, I want to do this, they would be like, all for it, even if they didn't understand it. And I think it's unfortunate because once that sort of started to deviate a little bit, you get this breakdown of something that becomes a caricature. Something that I was really interested in, and it was really important to me with my thesis, was that the Addamses weren't just playing opposite day. It wasn't like, oh, I like to have my breakfast in the morning with coffee, so they're gonna drink, I don't know, poison. It was, they weren't playing the opposite, they were playing these lives that they love, these pleasures, and they just happened to be interested in the strange and the odd. So it's unfortunate where some of the, I think there was an animated film, I forget which year, which was geared more toward children, but that also deviated too because it had that plot device of Wednesday sort of feeling like an outcast because she wanted to be different, whereas, you know, the Morticia and Gomez of the 60s show would have embraced it. So with Wednesday, I saw the first season at the time of writing my thesis to see if I could incorporate it, but I thought it best just to use the 60s show and the 90s films because I think those are the strongest examples. I think the show has fallen victim a bit to some of that deviation, but obviously there are so many artists working on it and so many people that still have that vision of the Addams family, but sometimes certain iterations fall short where they just have the vision and then they sort of, you know, skirt away from what the show established and the 90s films. That's a really great question. I'm glad you asked. Thank you.
Can you put your contact information back up?
Oh, sure, yeah. I know, I kind of went through that very quickly. I'm also available by contact through seance, as I've demonstrated there.
That's a great photo.
Oh, thank you. And if anyone is interested in the rest of the thesis, I have a chapter that essentially what I did for Morticia today, just on Gomez, the radical manliness of Gomez. I love him, and obviously Morticia. And it gets into so much more of the nitty gritty. Even when I was preparing for today, I'm like, oh no, like I had, you know, some script analysis and I had to pick and choose different things, but it's all in there and it was all such a blast. So if you want more, feel free to reach out anytime. I would love to share.
Do you have examples of Do you have examples of Morticia standing alone? A lot of this discussion is of her in relation to Gomez and her in relation to the children. Mm-hmm. Do you have a real concept, or are there certain cartoons or places in the movies where she really stands alone? Mm-hmm. And that's my first question. Second, have you ever channeled Morticia? Because you look a lot like her.
Oh, that's so nice.
And
Thank you.
I think it would be great to see you boil this down into her. You know.
That's so lovely. Thank you.
There's probably a Gomez out there somewhere.
Oh, I hope so.
but specific on Morticia right now.
Well, thank you. That's so lovely. Actually, at my I should have included the picture at my thesis. I wore it was a 80-degree day in May, and I climbed up to that cemetery with my thesis advisor and I invited my committee, and my thesis advisor, who was in a full black and white suit. Everyone came in black and white clothes that would have been worn, and but I wore a full gown and it had the long sleeves, and it was so much fun. And so channeling Morticia, definitely always. And then to your question about ever standing alone, so there are a few examples. I feel like when she has her own interests, there are times in the show where Gomez is off doing something different, or actually it's interesting to me because sometimes he'll be in the shot and he's doing something, maybe his train set or reading something or trying to learn something new, and she's over here. And I think that it's interesting because their separateness, it's the thing that does bring them together because they love that they're doing their own things. Morticia grows peculiar plants. She has man-eating plants. She has exotic plants. That's something that she enjoys. So smaller examples like that. But then also in the first film, as I was starting to mention, where Gomez's spirit is completely broken. There's those great scenes where she goes and she applies for a job, and they're like, what's your expertise? And she's like, spells and hexes. And they're like, I'll put down related arts, because they don't understand. But she goes and she goes off, and, you know, she speaks as though she's never, like, this is just the way it is. This is her interest. And I feel like, you know, where someone might be like, oh yeah, I'm interested in spells, and they know it's not the mainstream. They might sort of water it down for other people, but she doesn't. And I think that that's great. I think it's great that she went and she was like, my family needs to be saved. We either need money or I need to go confront his brother who double-crossed him. And she goes and she does it. Especially the great confrontation scene at the end when she's confronting Uncle Fester and, you know, saying, how could you do this? I think those scenes are great. And then also in the first film, there's a moment that I analyze in my thesis where the fake therapist comes in to try and sway them and say, oh, Uncle Fester, who's actually a fake, for those of you, you know, who might not be familiar or haven't seen it in a while, is really Uncle Fester just to get their money. And she's trying to convince them, and Gomez is completely distraught. He's absolutely an emotional wreck. He's afraid because he's not connecting with his brother. His brother seems to not be connecting with him. And Morticia, even though she is there with him, he's an emotional wreck. And it goes back and forth in this exchange where I wish I could remember the exact lines, but he says, Gomez says one thing, like, oh, he's not himself. And then Morticia counters with, I would recommend watching the scene, it's actually great. She counters with a different word that means, different words that mean, oh, he's backstabbing, or oh, he's, you know, but subtle. So she's allowing Gomez to have his emotions, but she's on to Uncle Fester the entire time. And I think that that's great, because while she's sitting there and letting Gomez do what he needs to do, feel what he needs to feel, her mind is already, okay, this is someone who is a fake. And then later, where she confronts Fester in the cemetery, it doesn't say, I know you're a fake, but gives them the family credo, and which is, we feast on those who wish to subdue us. And he's so scared. And he has to live in this house now. And she hasn't even pointed any fingers and said, I know you're a fake. She doesn't need to. She's already done what she needed to do, which I think makes her so smart. And I love to see that from her. So that was a great question. Thank you.
I think piggybacking off of that a little bit, one of the other great ways that she kind of stands on her own is her support of other women, even Debbie.
Yes.
Because she's always so supportive of other people's interests and their quirks and everything in her family, with her husband and everything, but also, like, when Debbie first shows up, she's putting on this act, and she is a total weirdo, and she's completely embracing of that. But even when she drops the act and is like, no, actually, you know, I'm the Black Widow murderer, I feel like if Debbie had just been honest from the beginning, that Morticia would still have been like, you know, I'm very interested in the things that you like.
Yes.
I'm very supportive. We'll still welcome you here. And, like, she's really a woman who lifts up other women, even if they're homicidal.
For sure. And even the scene at the end of the second film where they're all strapped to electric chairs and Debbie has got them and she's like, you're all gonna die. They're like listening to her woes and they're like, oh no, like that's so heartbreaking. Yeah, and they're just letting her have it and they're like, oh, Debbie, that's awful. And I just think that too, I think a lot of people might see them as spooky and odd, which in their minds might make them mean or cruel, but never. Even in the original show, they were never cruel or twisted in that way. They were always generous with their neighbors. If, you know, someone needed money, they were like, here, take it. Even in the films, they look for all their old antiques to give to the auction for the, like, children's benefit. And I think that that is an excellent point where she does lift up other women. She might not understand the interest or what they're doing, but she always will try and approach it with curiosity, and I think that's what makes Morticia so great too.
When you were working on your thesis, was there a light bulb moment or a moment that you had not even considered that was that kind of put Morticia in a feminist context or a societal context that despite kind of having like a generalized idea of her, that you were like, oh my gosh, I never even thought of how that snowballs into society and into the history of feminism. And also, I'd like to flip it around to you of what's one of your favorite moments.
Oh, thank you for asking. So, to your question, which is a great question, my thesis covered, I had opened with Some of Charles Addams is like the history, some of his cartoons just to set that up. Gothic literature, the comic Gothic, which is when comedy and horror come together. So if you've ever seen Young Frankenstein, if you haven't, please watch it. You have your movie for tonight. It's a perfect night for it. But then also going into these characters, so there was the initial plan to have that and then have Gomez, Morticia, Wednesday, and then an analysis of the 90s films. There was never, there was a moment where, the light bulb moment, where I said, oh, what about what was happening at the time? So the ads that I showed, there were so many more of them. They were really crazy to look at. I was even like sending emails to like my advisor with like some of like the edits in there, and I was like, I feel bad even putting these ads in an email like real big. But that was one of the light bulb moments, I think, because like I said, their house is a museum. And when you think of a museum, the function is to go and you enjoy and you look at and you participate in this different way of thinking that isn't necessarily consuming. It's consuming with your mind and maybe your passions and special interests. But it's not consuming in that way that involves money or appliances. And I think that when I had that moment, I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. This is part of it. Obviously, the Addamses were revolutionary. No one was really doing it at the time besides the Munsters, but they sort of, did their own thing. But I think that was a really important part because it does set up where we all kind of fall. We all are in this system, and then to look at a family who they just have interests that are theirs, especially for women like Morticia. She was able to have these interests. She was able to have her home and feel pride in her home without having it to be perfect. So I think it was important to include, and I have longer analysis of so many more crazy ads. I think one of the ads, the heading said, "Is it illegal to kill a woman?" And I had to look at it. Oh, it was okay. And I had to look at it for 10 minutes. It's like it was something for, I think, pencil sharpeners. I was like, how is, yeah, oh yeah, yes, yeah.
My school uses that office
Yes.
supply. That's where I'm like, I know that name.
Exactly. I looked at it and I was like, what? Like, so there are so many more that, especially earlier someone was mentioning, oh yeah, how she does uplift other women and she doesn't isolate herself from other women. There was an ad for breath freshener, and the ad was just like her husband getting taken by another woman and being like, you know how men are, and it's like, you better not have bad breath because God forbid he's gonna be out. So especially having ads like that wanted to pit women against other women, it was so important that Morticia, like you mentioned, welcomed other women, welcomed, the more normal characters, and that too is where the comedy came from. It wasn't that, oh, they're so strange. It was that other people's reactions to them was what made it funny. They would invite them over for dinner all the time, and they would be the Addamses would be having a great time, and the guests would be terrorized by their dragon or something. So I think that having that, that was really an important light bulb moment. So then there was a whole chapter just dedicated to that in between the introduction and then the characters. And then you asked my favorite. Let's see. I love that they sword fight. I think sword fighting is amazing. I've always wanted a sword. But I love that. I think that they can engage in that. There's that great scene where Gomez is even sword fighting with his financial advisor, and the financial advisor is struggling, and Gomez is like, good job, and he's like, good pull, man, and he's, talking business, but that is what business is for Gomez. Moments like that, but also in the first film where you first meet Morticia, I did an analysis of this entire scene from the script in my thesis, where Gomez, she's not even awake, so it's understood that she technically isn't around consciously. And the way he talks about her when she isn't around to hear it, he just goes on about her, how he adores her, how he loves her. And also in that scene, they have this discussion, and they're gonna engage in some sensual play with each other, but she also, it's the one of the first moments of the film, and it's established that it's consensual. She says yes. She says, let's go for it. Yes, do it again. It's one of the most important lines in the film, I think, and it essentially was one of the things that opened the film. So that moment, I love them. I think that the moments in the show where they comfort Wednesday, or like the dragon bit where they're all upset, who would slay a dragon? I think that all of those moments are great. They were always there to jump in. And they're funny too, without, being harmful or hurtful to anyone. I think those are some of my favorite moments. Also the ballroom scene. I love the mamushka. I think that, Raul Julia, multi-talented man, he sang that he did opera, he did Shakespeare before. He's amazing. So just how joyful that scene is, and how, embracing they are to Uncle Fester. Even though, Morticia, they throw this whole party for him, and she knows he's not really Fester, but she's like, well, he means something to Gomez, so let's pull out all the stops. Yeah. I've always wanted to go to a party like that, so I think those are some of my favorite moments. Thank you for asking. These are all great questions. Thank you so much.
Sorry, last question from me.
That's all right. You can have as many as you want.
Thank you. So I wondered if you cover in your thesis or have an opinion about the character from the original 60s series, Ophelia, who is Morticia's relative, played also by Carolyn Jones, and is completely different from her. Do you cover that at all in your thesis?
So I had that's a great question. I had a few notes, but the thesis is over 100 pages long. I needed to cut some things. I have thoughts about her in the sense that I think, to me, that makes it more interesting, because it does bolster the fact that Morticia just has these spooky and macabre interests, but part of her family, Ophelia, for those of you who haven't watched the show, she's very bubbly and she has flowers in her hair, and she's like the opposite of Morticia. But I think that the fact that she does have a family member that is that archetype, I think it just bolsters the fact that she doesn't isolate herself from other women. She's still her sister. We all have family members that we're different from. But I think that, instead of having her sister maybe being a caricature of, oh, she's just this other Gothic woman, or she's a vampire, some kind of vampiress archetype, I think that it just strengthens it, because Morticia does have this fierce love for her family, no matter if, they are bubbly and playful in that way. She's still, Morticia herself is still bubbly and playful. So I think that having that character, it does make it interesting, because it just strengthens that whole idea that, they're not just playing opposite. It's just maybe they have different interests. Maybe, they came from the same family, but they just have different interests, and that's okay. That's a great question.
One thing that I like about Morticia is that she's a strong woman, but she's not mean. Mm-hmm. Especially from those time periods, whenever they showed a strong woman, mm-hmm. It was always like somebody who was controlling, yes. Mean, putting people down, mm-hmm. That kind of thing. And Morticia wasn't like that. And I would like to see more.
Yes. So that's such a great point. Thank you so much. So it also, again, it's the fact that she is able to be herself and not defined by the male gaze, which, a lot of times, like you said, we do see women who get to be strong, but then they have to be mean and cruel. And one of my areas of interest are actually comic books and the development of comic books, and the complexities of writing them and illustrating them, but also the characters and how they made way for so many different people from different backgrounds. But what I'll say about women is that while in comics a lot of times you do have these women that get to be strong like Morticia, a lot of films that we see, the female character is standing on someone's chest and being mean and chastising them. I think a great example is Wonder Woman, where she is just kind. That's part of her superpower. And I think that within that same vein is where you don't have to be cruel to be strong. And I think that having women, especially characters, and men, a lot of times when you have a woman who's strong but cruel and cold, it is a woman written by a man, unfortunately, or the constructs around the way that that's written. And I think that it is really important to have Morticia and characters like that, where, they are strong, but they're kind. I think that that's also why someone was saying earlier why she's so enduring, because I think that her kindness is what makes her enduring. You could have these characters that were very cold and what might be seen as strong, but I think there's a real strength in true kindness and acceptance. So I think that's also why Morticia is such a strong character. That's a great point. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, I just want to know, did he start his career with the New Yorker in the 1930s, or was it after the Second World War?
So Charles Addams began in the 1930s, and then it was 1938 that the Addams Family comic strip came out.
And was he still, he did go into the service. So was it started up again in the 40s after he got out in the New Yorker?
Yeah, he stayed with the New Yorker. I don't know the exact time frame, but he was with them for quite some time. The comic strip was being published up until, I wish I had the date. It's all in there, but
To the 60s?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for a long time. I mean, longer than the show's run, because the show only ran for 2 seasons, unfortunately. But yeah, he was for a while, because there's so many. Even in my research, I was like, oh my goodness, I just get to pour through these and pick, and it's so hard to choose. There's so many. And recently I learned that at Penn University, there's a mural, Charles Addams mural that very few people know about, and I'm sad that I found this out after my thesis, but he was kind of everywhere. He was just showing up, and I think that's really interesting. So if you're ever there, maybe ask someone about it. I would like to see it.
I thought he went to the University of Penn.
But it's like a secret, hidden, yeah.
You're talking about
Yeah.
University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah.
No,
mhm.
it's at Penn State.
Yeah, Penn, yeah.
Okay.
But it's like a secret mural or something. There was, yeah. So if you're ever there, it's really, that was interesting to me. I feel like he kind of shows up in odd places, which is very him. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. You're such an amazing audience. Could we have a final round of applause for Emma?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'd be happy to answer any other questions if you'd like to get in touch with me, or if you'd like to read the thesis or any other parts of the thesis. Thank you so much for coming out. Drive safe.
How do we get to your thesis? Just email you?
Yeah.
Where did you go to school?
Loyola University.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, if you shoot me an email, I recently sent it to someone that I met in Washington State. And they were like, I would like to read it. And I was like, I'll send it. And they were like,
Capital read 100 pages about Morticia.
oh, that's so lovely. I'm trying to get it either published or put in a research base for
Right, a database.
Yeah. So if that happens, that would be great. But either way,